Welcome to the House of David with Pastor Scott Velain, a HolyImpactMinistries.com production, where we test the Scripture, contend for the faith, and stand for the truth. And now, here's your host, Pastor Scott Velain.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the House of David radio program. I'm Pastor Scott Velain with HolyImpactMinistries.com, and I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening for our Memorial Day radio broadcast, this May 28th, 2018. Can you believe that it is Memorial Day? Doesn't that just shake your tree a little bit? It is unbelievable. By this Friday, we'll be into June, and you know what that means. Halfway through 2018, half of 2018 is already in the bucket. It's already gone. It's in the history books, as they say. That just is absolutely amazing. That just absolutely amazes me. But I guess time flies when you're having fun, I guess. I don't know how much fun we're having, but time certainly is indeed flying, that's for sure. You know, I have a lot that I want to talk about this particular Memorial Day. And, of course, the topic of this evening's study is going to be about men of valor and what the Bible has to say about men of valor. And I think you'll find this very interesting. You know, it was just earlier this week that I had watched one of these news programs. I think it was Fox News, but I'm not sure if that's what it was. But there was a serviceman and a servicewoman. They were together, and I, if I remember correctly, maybe it was Walmart or some kind of discount store that they were in, and this fella was just absolutely badgering them and bullying them and just being as disrespectful as he possibly could be. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my ears. I couldn't even believe I was seeing what I was seeing. And, you know, this serviceman and this servicewoman was trying to explain, you know, the reason that you can talk to me the way you're talking to me right now is because we've given you the freedom of speech. And this guy just wasn't having it. He was just belligerent, full of vanity and full of himself, and just was looking for a fight is what he was looking for. And, you know, I hear these things over and over and over again, and even from Christians now. We are hearing these things, and it just blows my mind. It really does. And I just want to talk a little bit about what the Word of God says about such things. You know, it seems like we live in a day and an age where nothing is sacred. Nothing. Absolutely nothing is sacred anymore. And it's getting so dark and so disgusting and so vile out there that it's important for Christians like ourselves who truly believe in the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, true Christians who are God-fearing, cross-bearing, Messiah-following Christians, not just professing Christians, but true Christians, that we guard ourselves against this ignorance that we see absolutely all around us, because it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. If you can imagine that. It is going to get worse. But it is another beautiful day that the Lord has made, and it's another day that we here in the United States can enjoy the freedoms that have been bought and paid for with the very blood of our brothers and sisters who have laid their lives down in service to us all. And I just want to say this before we ever even get started here today. I just want to say, from Holy Impact Ministries, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone who is now serving, and also to the families of those who have fallen, and those families as well. we just want to be sure to say thank you. We certainly do appreciate you. Some may not, but we certainly do. You know, over the years, the meaning of Memorial Day has just been severely tarnished here in the United States by those who are ignorant and unstudied and care more about themselves than they do about the body of our Messiah. Those who gave their lives in service to us lie anxiously awaiting the resurrection, along with the apostles and the prophets and the rest of the body of our Messiah that have passed through the veil and are anxiously awaiting the second coming of our Messiah. It is written in the Word of God that there is no greater gift than a man lay down his life for his brother. And I would submit to you, my friends, that that gift should not, and I repeat, not be taken lightly. Today, we oftentimes hear of the most repugnant things coming out of the mouths of a society and a culture long ago lost to the truths that can only be found within the pages of their God-breathed scriptures. And to make things even worse, many of these repugnant things come out of the very mouths of those who profess to be Christians. Now, it doesn't surprise me that today's modern-day version of Christianity has lost its way. Today's modern-day version of Christianity lost its way centuries ago. But to hear people who profess to be Christians mocking and degrading and persecuting the very men and women who have given them the freedom to mock and to degrade and to persecute them openly in their public squares is nothing short of a tragedy. There is absolutely nothing that I hate to see more than a professing Christian dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight. And most of this, my friends, I would submit to you, is nothing more than monkey see, monkey do. Today, I'd just like to spend a little time putting some truth in the hearing of those lost and shameful professing Christians. And I'd like to remind the rest of the world that just because someone professes to be a Christian does not by any means mean that they are a Christian. There will indeed be many who profess to be Christians who indeed are not Christians, and I dare say that many of them are in for a very rude awakening when our Messiah returns. I want the world to know, and I want the world to understand, that just because someone says that they're a Christian does not mean that they are a Christian. If a zebra says that he's a dog, that does not mean that he is one. You will know them by their stripes. And so it is with those who say that they are Christians and are not. I'd like to read you some red-letter words that come straight out of the very mouth, the very tongue, the very breath of our Messiah. We can find these red-letter words to start out with in Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 23. Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 23, starting with Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. He says, and I quote, he says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree can't bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit," hear this now, "every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Not every one who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." Who is? "But the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." Now that is a sentence that most modern-day Christians just breeze right over and don't pay any attention to. But I want to read it again, Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. And this should be highlighted in everyone's Bible. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." Not everyone who comes down to the front of the aisle and says a 60-second tearful prayer with some guy on the radio or some guy in an amphitheater or some guy standing behind a pulpit. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, then who is going to enter the kingdom of heaven? He says, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. He says, on that day, many will come to me and they'll say, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? And didn't we cast out demons in your name? And didn't we do many mighty works in your name? And I'll declare to them, I never knew you. I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. There are indeed false prophets in the world today who come to us in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are indeed ravenous wolves. The Bible tells us that we'll recognize them by their fruits. In other words, we'll recognize them by the fruits that they produce. The fruit that they produce will always be rotten. Their fruit will always be filled with hate and disdain for their fellow man. Their fruit will reek of vanity and self-loathing and pride and arrogance and ignorance and faithlessness. Our Messiah tells us very clearly in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, that not everyone who says to him, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Our Messiah says that only those who do the will of his Father who's in heaven will gain entrance into his kingdom. And I assure you, my friends, that the day is going to come that many are going to say to him, and I quote, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? And didn't we cast out demons in your name? And didn't we speak in tongues? And didn't we do all these mighty works and all these things in your name? And our Messiah is going to indeed turn to them and declare to them that he never knew them. And even worse than that, he will command them to depart from him because they are workers of lawlessness. On this Memorial Day, we need to remember that not everyone is a Christian just because they claim to be a Christian. There are many who think in their small minds that they are Christians, and they are not. On this Memorial Day, we need to remember our men and women of valor, and those who have given their lives so that we can enjoy the God-given freedoms that we and our children enjoy today. To whom much is given, much is expected. Today's liberal-minded left-wing culture and society is so caught up in themselves and what they want that they have lost sight of what they already have. For them, it's all about themselves. It's all about what they want and how they want it. If they just happen to be a man and he wants to use the little girl's bathroom, well, he should be able to use the little girl's bathroom because it's what he wants. If a woman decides that she no longer wants to be a woman and would rather be a man, she should be able to mutilate her body and become a man because it's what she wants. If she has sex and bears a child and doesn't want it, she should be able to murder that child because that's what she wants. If a man wants to lay with a man, he should be able to defy God and go ahead and lay with a man because it's what he wants. If the definition of marriage put forth by the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is between one man and one woman, and a man wants to change the definition of marriage according to the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he should be able to change the definition of marriage because it's what he wants. You see, it's never about what's right in the eyes of God, or what's right for society, or what's right for our children or our children's children. It's only ever about what they want. If they decide that our men and women of valor are nothing but worthless murderers, then our men and women of valor should be called nothing but worthless murderers, because it's what they want. It never ceases to amaze me how much of vanity and self-degradation can be found in today's culture, and yet society puts up with it readily enough. It reminds me of what the Apostle Paul once told the church at Corinth. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, the Apostle Paul tells the church at Corinth, and I quote, he says, "For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough." Today's modern-day Christian is all too ready to listen to a wolf in sheep's clothing that proclaims another Jesus to them, or that proclaims a different spirit to them, or that proclaims a different gospel message to them. Too many modern-day Christians have sold their souls to the devil in trade for a false imitation, a false man-made Jesus that has little, if anything, to do with the true Yeshua HaMashiach, who is the only begotten Son of the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This, my friends, is absolutely frightening. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what the Bible says about true men and women of valor. And we're going to clearly see how true God-fearing, cross-bearing, Messiah-following Christians feel about men and women of valor who have given their lives and their times in service to others. Stay with us. We'll be right back with a true biblical teaching on what God says about men of valor. You're listening to the House of David radio program. I'm Pastor Scott Velain with HolyImpactMinistries.com, and I'd like to thank you again for joining us this evening on this magnificent Memorial Day weekend as we comb through the Scripture to see what our God-breathed Scriptures have to say about men of valor. I'd like to start out this evening by reading Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. That's Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. I'm going to start with Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart. It's so that he can not find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. As we can clearly see in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 8, there is, and I quote, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. According to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 10, this is the business that God has given the children of men to be busy with. My point in all of this is that our Father in heaven is well aware of the need for war in a fallen world. He is well aware of the seed of Satan and his deceptive toil and his attempt to continue to be the little g god of this world. Our adversary has sown deception and disdain for all things sacred in this fallen world. He has thrown truth to the ground and is thought to change the times and the laws of the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The seed of Satan does indeed walk the face of the earth in the form of men who have also thrown truth to the ground and who have also been turned over to blindness so that they can no longer see the truth because they have rejected the truth and the only begotten Son of God who brought it to them. It's important for today's modern-day Christian to understand that there are many wars mentioned in the Bible. There are wars of conquest. There are wars of civil wars, and there's even a war in heaven mentioned in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. God is well aware of the need for war when evil attempts to triumph over good. God himself has commanded wars. Joshua was a man of war. Samuel was a man of war. David, a man who God said was after his own heart, was a man of war. Men of valor do not waver in the face of adversity. Men of valor are always ready to lay their lives down for their brothers. King David defeated the Philistines by following God's strategy for war. I want you to hear about what Paul said about faith. The Apostle Paul in the book of Hebrews chapter 11 goes through a long laundry list of people who had faith and what faith meant and what they were able to accomplish with that faith. And I want us to listen to what Paul said about these biblical men of war and valor. We can find this in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 through 34. Again, that's Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 through 34. Starting with Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Those who boast of not believing in self-defense are almost always inconsistent. They'll always use seatbelts in their cars, locks in the doors of their homes. Some of them will even take flu shots. But they will balk when it comes to protecting themselves with guns or someone else that uses a gun to protect themselves. Evidently, they believe in a little self-protection, but not big protection. Or do they believe in protection against things, but not protection against people? Or do they even know what they believe? If you believe that guns and self-protection are a sin, then don't call a police officer to protect you when someone's raping your daughter or breaking into your house, because all you're doing is causing that police officer to sin. The point that I'm trying to make is that our Father in heaven is well aware of a Christian's need to protect his family. Our Messiah tells us to turn the cheek if someone strikes us in a personal confrontation. And yes, indeed, we should be strong enough to do so in a personal confrontation. But he does not say to stand idly by and allow evil men to rape, kill, maim, and pillage the people of God. This has never been God's intent. And this is why we're told about men like Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, David and Samuel. Each of us are called by God to serve God in different ways. And to say that someone who has given their life in the service to his fellow man is a sinner is to condemn ourselves. Some professing Christians will proclaim that David couldn't build the temple because he was a man of war and that he had blood on his hands. And this was true. David was king and he was in charge of protecting the people of Israel. But I want us to listen to what his son Solomon had to say about why David could not build the temple. We can find that in 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. Again, 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. Starting with 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 3. You know that David my father could not build a house for the name of Yahovah his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until Yahovah put them under the soles of his feet. But now Yahovah my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. And so I intend to build a house for the name of Yahovah my God, as Yahovah said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name. What today's modern-day Christian needs to understand is that the Bible never condemns the actions of a soldier following the orders on a battlefield. In fact, how many Christians know and understand who it was that our Messiah said had more faith than anyone else he had ever seen in Israel? I'd like to turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 8, verses 5 through 10. Again, Matthew, chapter 8, verses 5 through 10. Starting with Matthew, chapter 8, verse 5, it says, and I quote, When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you to come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes, and to my servant, Do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled, and he said to those who followed him, Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. According to our Messiah, a Roman Catholic centurion, a soldier, a man of valor, had more faith than anyone else in Israel. A centurion is a man of valor. He is a man of service and is indeed a man of war. Nowhere in our God-breathed scriptures do we ever see a soldier or a man of war being rebuked for performing the duties of a soldier or a man of war. We see another Roman centurion by the name of Cornelius, who was saved in Acts chapter 10. These men of war were not rebuked for performing their duties, nor were they ever told that they must change their professions. In the book of Luke, we find soldiers who come to John the Baptist asking him what they should do. And I want us to hear what John the Baptist tells the soldiers that they must do. We can find that in the book of Luke, chapter 3, verses 12 through 14. Again, the book of Luke, chapter 3, verses 12 through 14, starting with Luke chapter 3, verse 12. Tax collectors also came to be baptized, and he, John the Baptist, said to him, Teacher, what shall we do? Or the tax collectors said, came to be baptized by John, and they said to John, Teacher, what shall we do? And he said to them, Collect no more than you are authorized to do. Soldiers also asked him, And we, what shall we do? And he said to them, Do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusation, and be content with your wages. Notice that John the Baptist never tells the soldiers to stop being soldiers. John the Baptist never tells the soldiers to find another profession. He simply tells them not to extort money from anyone by threats or false accusation, and to be content with their wages. The Apostle Paul himself uses the analogy of a soldier putting on the full armor of God as an illustration of spiritual truth. If being a soldier was a sin, it's highly unlikely that the Apostle Paul would have used soldiering as a metaphor or an example of today's Christian. Our Father in heaven completely understands the need for war in a fallen world. War even occurs in heaven. I'd like us to turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verses 7 through 12. Again, Revelation, chapter 12, verses 7 through 12, starting with Revelation, chapter 12, verse 7. Now a war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they love not their lives, even unto death. Get that, my friends. They loved not their lives, even unto death. And we're talking about a war in heaven. Continuing with verse 12, it says, Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. According to what our Messiah tells us in the book of Revelation, the devil has come down to us in great wrath because he knows that his time is short. In the 24th chapter of the book of Matthew, our Messiah tells us very clearly that we will hear of wars and rumors of wars. He told us that nation would rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And so, we should not be surprised that we live in a fallen world chock full of war and rumors of wars. Some professing Christians will proudly proclaim that God did not order these wars as he did in the Old Testament. They will proudly proclaim that these nations create wars to feed the military-industrial complex and the true shadow governments of the world. And although I would tend to agree that this is oftentimes the case, I would also submit to these professing Christians that no one wins a war without the acknowledgement and agreement of God. Many professing Christians will wrongly proclaim that men who go to war kill, and that the 10 Commandments tell us that thou shalt not kill. But I would submit to you, my friends, that that is not what is written within the foundations of our 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, verse 13 commands us not to murder. It does not command us not to kill. The Hebrew word in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13 is ratzach. And according to Brown Driver Briggs' Hebrew definitions, it means to murder, which is a premeditated sin. There are no examples found anywhere in our God-breathed scriptures of God commanding any soldier for sinning on the battlefield or in the line of service. In fact, it is written that there were to be special provisions for men of valor. In the 24th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, verse 5, it is written, and I quote, When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife, whom he has taken. Men of valor in the word of God are always treated with the utmost respect and honor for their service. Even Abraham, our Father in heaven, calls the father of all nations, went to war to free Lot, the son of Abraham's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom. And I want us to listen to what Abraham did when he learned that the kings of the north had taken his nephew Lot and his family. Did Abraham just sit on his hands and do nothing? No, not at all. We can find this in Genesis chapter 14, verses 13 through 16. Starting with Genesis chapter 14, verse 13, it says, and I quote, Then one who had escaped came and told Abraham the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were allies of Abraham. When Abraham heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, He led forth his trained men. Get that, my friends, trained men, trained for war. Born in his house, 318 of them, and he went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Habah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women, and the people. Is Abraham also to be called a murderer or a sinner? Did God command Abraham to go get Lot? It's not written anywhere in our God-breathed scriptures that God ever commanded Abraham to make war against the kings of the north in order to bring back Lot and his family. But you see, Abraham was well aware of the fact that in order for evil to triumph, all that is needed is for good men to do nothing. It is said that evil cannot be replaced with evil. But I would submit to you, my friends, that men who act in righteousness and do what is good in the eyes of Yahovah will always be counted as righteous. God hates a coward. Listen to what is written in the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verse 37 through 39. Again, this is the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 37 through 39. Starting with Hebrews, chapter 10, verse 37. It says, and I quote, "For yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back," get that, my friends, "if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed." Get that, my friends. We are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. What would have happened if David were to shrink back instead of beheading Goliath of Gath? What would have happened if Joshua were to shrink back instead of defeating the king Ah? What would have happened if Saul were to shrink back instead of defeating the Amalekites? I dare say the same thing would have happened to them as will happen to those of us who shrink back today. Many people will say that the United States of America has fought many unrighteous wars, and although I am inclined to believe that this may indeed be the case, I also have to look at the enemies of the United States. And I have to look at the sins committed by these enemies in the eyes of God. And I must also factor into the equation that the United States of America was born a Christian nation on more than just one occasion, the Mayflower Compact being just one of them. And yes, the United States Capitol is a replica of the Vatican. And yes, graven images of other gods adorn our Capitol. And yes, a pagan obelisk adorns its grounds, parading as the Washington Monument. And yes, the buildings in our nation's capital are exact replicas of Greek mythology. But these things were built into this nation by godless men. We should be adult enough to understand that wherever there is good, it should be understood that evil will always follow along like a lost puppy. I dare say it's not about the monuments or the buildings or the graven images that evil men have erected, but it is about the hearts and the minds of God's people who dwell in the land. It's about the remnant that he has saved for himself. It's about the house of Israel whom God will call out of this nation and every other nation on earth to return back to the promised land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just like he promised. Our Father in heaven has not made void his promise to Abraham, or to we who are the seed of Abraham through the body of our Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. Evil men will do what evil men will do. Evil men will build what evil men will build. Evil men will say what evil men will say. But no being, either seen or unseen, has the power to rebuke or nullify or override the promise of the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each one of us will be judged by the only begotten Son of the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Some of us will have given our lives in service to others. Some of us will have kept their lives to themselves. Some of us will have served others, while some of us will have served no one but ourselves. In the end, I would submit to you, my friends, that men of valor who have given their lives in the service of their brothers and their sisters will be much farther ahead than those liberal, left-winged, self-indulgent slaves of sin. It is written in the book of Titus that to the pure all things are pure, but to the defiled and the unbelieving nothing is pure. But both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for any good work. Believe it or not, my friends, there are still some things in this world that are indeed sacred. Honor and dignity, righteousness, justice, and valor are but a few things that are still sacred to those of us who belong to the body of the only begotten Son of God. The book of Titus tells us that there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers. And it also tells us that they must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. The book of Titus teaches us to rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and commandments of people who turn away from the truth. This day I would submit to you that those who dishonor the fallen do indeed dishonor themselves. Any village idiot can tell you that freedom is not free. Those who fought and died so that wicked people would have the freedom to dishonor them and to persecute them and to have a voice to say whatever it is that they want to say about them, just like everyone else. But those who do dishonor them and persecute them and voice their evil thoughts in public ought to be ashamed and sharply rebuked by those who are grateful and understand that the freedom that we have was paid for with their blood, and that it is by the hand of God that each one of us stands here today. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, because both their minds and their consciences are defiled. And even though many of them profess to know God, they deny him by their works, and they are indeed detestable, disobedient, and unfit for any good work. The men and women who have given their time and their lives to serve others should be honored and blessed with our prayers of safety. We should be praying for the leaders of our nations and our kings and our queens that sit atop. We should be praying for these very special men and women who have been given a heart of service to fight and defend the borders of a nation that has all but forgotten the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We should remember that God would not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for the sake of even one true child of God. And I dare say that there are many more than 50 righteous people still living in the United States of America to this very day, and I can attest as a witness to that. As dark as it is, as evil, and the days that we are living in have become, and as wicked as our culture has grown and as self-serving as society is today, this great nation still contains many God-fearing, cross-bearing, Messiah-following Christians within its borders. A soldier's duty is to do what his commanding officers command him to do in times of war and out. Our Father in heaven is well aware of the duties of these men and women of valor. He is well aware of their job description, and he is well aware of who is calling the shots as well. In the 4th chapter of the book of Nehemiah, we see that the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites were coming against Jerusalem and trying to stop the wall that protects Jerusalem from being built. And it is written that each of the builders had his sword strapped on his side while he built. Each man who worked on the wall worked with one hand and held his weapon in the other. Our very own Messiah told his disciples in Luke chapter 22, verse 36, to let no one who was without a sword not be without a sword. He told them to sell your cloak and go buy one. Why? Our Messiah clearly tells them to buy a sword because he will not be with them any longer, because his time had come to be numbered with the transgressors, and that it was what was written about him was about to be fulfilled. So he had to leave them. And I have heard pastors and priests and bishops and popish leaders try to do all kinds of theological and philosophical gymnastics all over the place in order to try and erase these red-letter commandments from our God-breathed scriptures. And yet, to this day, they still stand just as red as they ever were. And I would say this to those who believe that it is wrong to defend oneself. The next time your house gets broken into, don't bother calling a police officer to come sin while he's protecting you. To all the servicemen and women who serve in our armed forces, we at Holy Impact Ministries say, thank you. And we appreciate you. And we give God thanks for you and for your service and for your family's service. And to the fallen who have laid their lives down for their brothers, we want to remind their families that they have not been forgotten, nor will they be forgotten, not in this life, nor the life to come. We remember you, and we appreciate you, and we give God thanks for you and for your service, and for your family's service. To those who believe that our men and women of valor are nothing but murderers, I would simply say this. When North Korea decides to lob a missile into Hawaii or California or maybe even Washington, don't bother calling the Army, the Navy, the Marines, or the Air Force or the National Guard to sin by protecting you and your family. And before you point to our men and our women of valor as being nothing but murderers, please understand that the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is indeed a God of love and a God of peace. But the world will soon find out that he is also a God of war and a God of valor. Thank you again for joining us on the House of David radio program. You can visit us at holyimpactministries.com. We hope and pray that you have a wonderful Memorial Day. And remember the fallen. Shalom, everyone.
Thank you for listening to The House of David, a holyimpactministries.com production, where we test the Scripture, contend for the faith, and stand for the truth. Shalom, everyone.